It's time to hear from our next speaker and honorary chair for this event. She's a barrister and has employed linguists across various jurisdictions in courts and tribunals. She's not only helped to set up Linguist Collective, but chose the name too. The LC agency is grateful to her for her support and solidarity to the linguist community. It's my pleasure to introduce Lynne Townley, who will share her insights on best practices for utilising interpreters in a legal setting. Welcome, Lynne.
Thank you, Samina, for that warm welcome, and also thank you to the collective as well. It's been an absolutely fascinating morning with all the different speakers, and very interesting for me as in many ways a spectator to the world of linguists and interpreters, and also as a service user. And what's extremely interesting for me, I've obviously prepared what I wanted to say, and I have got quite strong views on what's happening in the way that interpreters are being used and abused within it's not just within the UK, but I think it's certainly a pan-European thing, and the issues around pay and conditions as well. I was going to cover that, and I was also going to cover issues about quality and also about using family members as interpreters, and I am going to cover those, but I'm just very interested to see that a number of the speakers have already picked up on those. So these are obviously key issues that a number of people are recognising and bringing to the fore as key issues for interpreters moving forward. And I've made sort of quite detailed notes of what the speakers are saying, because I'll be doing the wrap up at the end of the day. But it seems to me that the key things that are coming out so far have got to do with, first of all, with quality. How do you measure quality? And that's quite difficult if you work internationally or across different jurisdictions. Quality, how do you stop bad practice coming in? Is that within the gift of organisations like LC to stop that, or to report those kind of things? And also the issues around funding, and what sort of remuneration interpreters are prepared to work for. I had some experience in that in the pan-European setting, and it's extremely concerning at the moment that certainly across Europe that there seems to be an expectation almost that interpreters will work at a loss in certain with certain organisations, and that's very concerning. So my experience of working with interpreters personally is all within the justice system. And the problem with the justice system and the NHS, certainly within the UK, is that both organisations are existing on public funding, which has not only been cut just absolutely year on year over the last, probably going on for the last, well, nearly actually my whole life. It's been going on certainly since the late 70s, but very worryingly since 2010, since we went into a government with austerity policies. The cuts from 2010 onwards practically decimated the justice system and certainly affected the NHS. And then we're coming out on the back of COVID. So really, those of us that provide services to the public sector have got an uphill battle to find fair remuneration, because the money just simply isn't there. And that is a challenge, and why it's necessary for groups to join into collectives like Linguist Collective, because individuals can't fight the system on their own. So that's the first thing. We need interpreters. We need to fight back against attitudes. Now, this isn't just affecting interpreters. It's also, I have to say, it's also been commented that judges might be one day taken over by AI intelligence systems as well. But I think what we've seen from the previous speakers is that interpreting is nuanced. It's you know, as the last speaker said, it's interpreting what someone says by their facial expressions, tone of voice, so on. It's not something that AI can replace. And I think that will be a big challenge moving forward into the future, because someone is bound to say, we can actually, you know, we can use Google Translate or whatever, we don't need interpreters, and we will save money. And that's something that has to be really fought against. And secondly, when we're looking at the value of interpreters, we've also had the issue raised today about how often in place of interpreters family members are used. Now, I'm really disappointed to hear that, because back in 2008, when I was working with victims of honour-based violence, and I was speaking on a large conference circuit, which trained a lot of public sector officials over a 2-year period, when I was working for a government organisation. We found back then that one thing that was reported as had happened within social services was that there was reports that a victim had been forced into a marriage and was experiencing quite serious violence at the hands of her husband. And what happened when the social worker went to visit, the husband was used as the interpreter. Now, I don't need to say much more than that, but there's been other things that were raised by our speakers today, similar type issues, and I'm disappointed that, you know, almost 20 years on, that's still happening. Because whenever I told that story at conferences, I got gasps, and I thought, well, things have moved on, but clearly they haven't. And it was Mike Orloff who mentioned about I think it was a 9-year-old boy interpreting for his mother in a gynecological appointment. And I mean, clearly that's a slightly different issue, but equally as traumatic, I would imagine, for both parties involved. And, you know, that is why interpreters need to be made available. Family members can't do it. And also in certain cases, it's not just to do with the trauma, but in certain cases, and I mentioned honour-based violence is one, but there are more, domestic violence, family members may actually not necessarily be on the side, as it were, of the person who needs the interpreting. And actually it can put the person in quite extreme danger as well. Now, I think we're quite pressed for time. So the final thing I just want to mention, and it was brought up by Barbara Rishi as well, about telephone interpreting and what can be lost with not being able to see facial expressions and tones of voice and so on. It's going to be a problem for the future. I just want to point that out to everyone. It's one of the downsides of the lack of funding. One of the things that we have to do now in the justice system, we work online quite a lot of the time over a common video platform. And I think what will happen, again, due to funding, is that online hearings are going to increase, as are online medical consultations and online consultations and things going on in all sectors, where interpreters will be asked to come in and see on a Zoom platform or Teams platform or something similar. So what I would say, I would hope that telephone interpreting is on the way out, because we have other technologies where you can actually see people. I would hope that telephone interpreting will go quite soon, but by way of a warning or a heads up, everyone's going to have to get used to working on video platforms. And actually it's in all of our interests, those of us who want to support the work of the public sector, that we do that, because with the funding crisis that we have, and it looks like that's just simply not going to go away, probably not in our lifetimes, unfortunately, but that might actually be a saving grace for a lot of the services that we provide, that the online platform is actually a cheaper way, and it also cuts out things that have been raised today, the issues with car park and travel expenses and so on. So I think that's where the future lies, and I think we've got to be prepared to work with online video platforms, albeit that they're not the equivalent of face-to-face. Samina, I think my time's up. So those are the main points that I wanted to make. But if you want me to do a wrap up at the end
have
as
a
well, I'll do
question
that.
for you very quickly, if I may, before we head to your wrap up. It is from Sam Burner, Queensland, Australia, who I hope is still with us. If he's not, he was on Zoom. And what he asks is, what legal options do interpreters have in regard to the non-competition clauses that some agencies put into contracts?
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer, because it will be, I know that Sam's in Australia, it will depend on the jurisdiction, and it will depend essentially on what the applicable laws are for the jurisdiction. And at the end of the day, it's also down to bargaining as well, and whether individual interpreters feel that they can resist signing those clauses. I mean, at the end of the day, any kind of contract is open to negotiation. And that's why I said that's why Linguist Collective formed. It was to give a bargaining power, because the problem is, if you do sign a clause like that, then a company will try and hold you to it. And then if you want to challenge it legally, then it can be quite expensive, and it might involve going to court or tribunal. So at the end of the day, I think it's all a question of contract law, what you agree to, what you sign, and what the bargaining power is. And I think most companies tend to put those clauses in, and at the end of the day, it all depends whether they're fair and reasonable, which I know is a woolly legal answer. Yeah. But I think the key is that if interpreters can band together in a way that they have the power not to sign clauses that they feel are unfair and will restrict what they can do in future.
Thank you. And thank you so much for that response. And Sam, I hope that contributes to you and adds value to you. So Lynne, would you like to just do a little wrap up for us before I wrap the whole session?
Yes, so it's been a fascinating morning, and very ably and well hosted by you, Samina, as well, if I may say so. You definitely add value yourself just by being here. And in relation to our speakers, again, absolutely fascinating. And the one thing that came out from them all was just the sheer passion that they have for their roles, which unfortunately nowadays is highly lacking. And it's just good to see that the passion can take this profession through. So the things that came out from each of the speakers, we had Sue Leshan first, giving some very useful solutions to the day-to-day working of interpreters, but extremely important things that are often overlooked, the logistics of it, what you need to know and what you need to do to actually turn up and do your job properly. And that's very useful for anyone who wants to go into the area. Then Dr. Andrea Denby, sensitivity and not making assumptions. Again, that's a link that linked all the speakers, extremely important, and it's why we need humans rather than AI. And then Sophia Smith Galley, then again talking about how to win the trust of people. So again, it's the soft skills that that you basically you can't have from a machine. Soft skills for interpreters are extremely important. And she also made a very important point about how certainly when she was growing up that the education system wasn't very positive or vocal about the benefits of being from a multilingual household, and also about endangered languages. Again, I hope that's changing. And then another point that I know Mamoon, the founder of Linguist Collective, is very concerned about, as am I. It's endangered languages, and unfortunately, the link that languages have to politics, and I have experience of that living in Northern Ireland, and how the use of language can become linked into politics, which is extremely sad. And again, I hope things are moving on. And then Mike Orloff talking about the all-important need for regulation and risk. And clearly I've mentioned, and other speakers have mentioned, the clear risks that comes with interpreting, and the need to get it right. And also that interpreters are not translating machines. They play a very key role, and can actually prevent risks and events happening. I think as someone said, within the medical framework, interpreters have prevented deaths. So there's no greater risk than protecting against that. What Mike pointed out was the future challenges and the need to understand what the public sector wants, and also recognition about the value of standards. And I think that's something that is important across the world. And there's also a challenge, obviously, as interpreting is international, but there needs to be some clear link up and commonality of standards. So that's another thing for the future. He also talked about bad practices that I've mentioned in detail. Then we had Sana Neji, again, about trust and connecting, and her work with survivors. And finally, Barbara Rishi, who made some fascinating points about cultural sensitivity, again, about the risks of using family members, and pointing out, again, coming back to my point about how AI and the likes cannot ever replace the human interpreter. She talked about the cultural nuances of body language, and how she, in her interpreting, takes care to repeat the tone of voice used, and also the facial expressions, because that can be very key in a decision factor. I'm thinking about criminal cases with a jury, and actually how some small thing is interpreted. For example, she said about someone being in fear, and I mean that might be the key. Good interpretation of that might be the key between actually getting a conviction or not, and there's a victim behind that. So hugely important. And she also raised the issue of funding. So I think the things that have come out are recognition of the work that interpreters do, how it links in and is hugely necessary within the main public sectors of health, justice, and education. How they must be properly funded. They must have a bargaining power as well against unfair contracts, as our delegate from Australia raised. So it's quite a challenging area, and in regulation that obviously has to be fit across borders. So regulation, fighting AI, and fighting for terms and conditions are the three key things that I think come from this morning's discussion. So back over to you, Samina.
Thank you, Lynne. Thank you so much for the summation of all the fantastic discussions we've had today. And thank you for the insights into the justice system and highlighting the huge contribution that interpreters make. And thanks for your acknowledgement of me as well. I really appreciate it.